So I think the state of Colorado has given us a great segue to our friends in the state of Missouri. Casey, Drew, Sarah, if you'd like to switch on your cameras. And I think you've been set up for the frugal Olympics here, because I know cost effectiveness is something that has driven the work that's been going on in Missouri. So let's sort of raise the game on our friends in Colorado. But just to set the scene, we were fortunate enough to visit with you all in person in Jefferson City just a few months ago. And so we talked on camera, and the video is available on the NASCA website, about the Missouri's professional development transformation. But we had some great conversations on camera and off. And I'd love to just dive a little deeper into some of these things. But before we start, maybe one of you would like to pick up the baton and describe just what the professional development transformation was in Missouri in a couple of minutes. And then I'm going to ask you some really tough questions, my friends.
Sure. Thanks very much for the intro. I'll pick up the intro, and then Sarah and Casey will correct and fill in the gaps. Our professional development transformation here in the state of Missouri really centered around the basic proposition that I think is a theme that you're going to have throughout all the presentations, which is, if we're going to serve our citizens well, we have to make sure that the team members that we have the skills and capabilities they need to deliver. And the background for it in the state of Missouri is that, kind of systemic lack of investment in our workforce, nonpartisan observations stretching back for years, multiple administrations, that this had just not been prioritized. And so in essence, in a multi-year transformation, not with one initiative, but with a series of interlocking steps that would be mutually reinforcing, what we've tried to do is version 1.0 is really trying to provide the basics for the skills and capabilities for senior leaders, emerging leaders, but also skills and capability building on demand for every single state employee through our Mo Learning platform in partnership with LinkedIn. And wrapped around this entire effort, it was a shift, basically scrapping the almost cliche annual review process, check the box, labor intensive, heavy data that really didn't lead to anything meaningful, and in fact was in a way value destroying, or led to cynicism about the process. And we estimated that was close to a few 100,000 hours a year was spent in that process with very little value. We shifted that to a model that we can call Engage 2.0, which centers really upon more informal. There's a blend of informal structure, but it centers around monthly conversations between supervisors and their team leaders about their professional development, about how they can succeed in their role, but grow through time if they so choose, give the tools to do that. And we've also wrapped around that a really state-of-the-art, more formal, but easy to execute evaluation process that can be done with the cell phone on a quarterly basis. So it's not annual, it's done in a matter of minutes, where our supervisors can answer a few basic questions. And what that allows is for multiple data points on everyone to allow the true identification of those who are going above and beyond. Also, as part of that innovation, upward feedback in an optional form, where we have about 50% of our state employees are providing upward feedback now on their supervisors, which is another way of unleashing the potential. And should note that the ability to do evaluations on people, we can have multiple managers, for example. It doesn't have to be just in the line of control. If someone's working with multiple managers, there can be people participating in that evaluation process. So we have the wraparound of the skill and capability building, but we do have a shift from a annual kind of cliche check the box to a more conversation intensive. But we do also have evaluation layered on top of that, but made it as easy as possible to execute.
Okay, so Sarah, I'm going to come to you because Drew, as Chief Operating Officer, got the layup question that he can speak from the governor's office about how great everything is in the state of Missouri. Let's dive into the gritty stuff. So, as commissioner, how did you find out, to paraphrase Drew, that there was a systemic underinvestment in your talent? Like, how did you go about finding what the problem was and what some of the solutions could be?
We actually did when we came in to this administration now 4 years ago. We did a survey and we discovered how weak we were in some particular areas, in every area actually. So it's pretty obvious that we needed to really listen to what people were saying and telling us, and emphasize the fact that they were not getting what they needed. There was really no accountability. There was no clarity of roles. There was no real leadership. They didn't see their leaders role modeling what they should be. There was a whole variety of issues that we knew we had to work on. But by far the first one was to begin to invest in the people in the state of Missouri. And as Drew referenced, that really had been neglected for decades. And you know, when you think about government, it's a service and it's only as good as the people who are delivering it. And so that was just the logical place to begin.
Okay. So Casey, in your role as Director of Personnel, what did liaison look like with your peers in other agencies in terms of almost having the mandate to roll something out across government? What did that diplomacy look like?
Yeah, so similarly to what Colorado mentioned a few minutes ago, we have a decentralized HR system, so that we have the 16 executive agencies who each have their own HR team, their own HR director. And we, for the first time in a long time, brought all those people together and asked them what was working, what wasn't working, what their ideas were, and involved my peers, the HR directors from all the 16 different agencies, in the decision-making and the development process. We also involved team members from all of the 16 executive agencies and the deputies and the cabinet leaders to be part of this development process. We introduced to them best practices that we had learned from other states and other organizations. We did bring in some vendors to help us with the development of it. And I meet weekly. During COVID, it was actually, or during the start of COVID, it was biweekly. But I meet weekly with all of the HR directors from across the state to communicate the changes across this effort and many of our other efforts. And that attendee list, I mentioned we had 16 departments. That attendee list is up to about 80 people regularly on a weekly basis. And so I think that's testament to the fact that people are getting information that they need, and the conversations that we're having is really the problem-solving conversations. It's not just updates, it's problem-solving and sharing of best practices within all of the agencies and state government.
Casey, I want to dive in there. You've got 80 people voluntarily turning up for a meeting. What are they getting out of that? And let's dive into sort of self-interest. So why would I call into this call? What am I getting from that?
Right. So I think it's important to say that this talent development transformation is part of really a transformation that we're doing for all talent management within the state of Missouri. And so we launched our first ever statewide recruitment tool. So we had lots of ways people were applying for jobs at the state of Missouri. So about a year ago, at the same time as we did a lot of the Engage 2.0 work, we launched our new application site, and we launched Mo Learning a little over a year ago. And so and we also redid our classification and compensation structure within the past year. So we've been doing, just to name a few, we've been a little busy, but we wanted to provide an open communication channel because we had so many things going on, provide people updates and give them a chance to ask questions and see me as really a partner in this development as opposed to the big bad Office of Administration police force coming in and telling people what they had to do.
So I'm going to bring this over back to you, Drew, and then Jamie, I'm going to point to you, see if you've got any thoughts on this. But so you're sitting in the governor's office, making the case for investment during an incredibly tough financial year, maintaining investment during the middle of a pandemic. What are those conversations with Governor Parsons looking like?
Great question. And I think that the backdrop behind it is because we've been doing this for a few years. And so we have results. So that's one of the important things is that coming into the COVID challenge, the backdrop of the investment that we've been making in our state workforce is the proposition, and I'll use a small c conservative proposition. I'm in a nonpartisan role, but basically that through the investment in improving the quality of the state workforce, we can deliver higher quality services with a more efficient and in some cases smaller state government. And that case had been made with the data. That case had already been delivered in advance of a longer term story, so to speak. And so in the context of COVID, when, as many colleagues across the country faced some very, very difficult budget decisions, in that context, when it came time to reductions, it was explicit of we are not going to scale back on our investment in skill building and our investment in our state workforce and the professional development. That was an explicit decision because it was made against the backdrop of, quite frankly, past economic downturns. That is one of the first things that departments cut. They go like, wow, we can put that to the side. We're going to put to the side training. That's an easy thing, right? But we made the very deliberate decision that we would not make those reductions in this context precisely because the investment had been proven overall. That proposition of if we invest in our state workforce, that allows more efficient, more effective, and more and better delivery to the customers of services. So we were able to make that case, and should note that that was not just in the emergency context of COVID, but in our upcoming budget that the governor will be releasing later this month in January, those investments will be continued. So it's against that backdrop of very, very practical results.
And Drew, I didn't mean the question lightly because obviously you and Sarah are putting your personal names behind this, and it is an easy thing to cut from the budget. So I think the strength of what you're saying, but if I hear it right, the recommendation is make sure it's tied to return on investment. So just tie it to the numbers, tie it to the numbers. Is that correct? Yeah,
absolutely. And I would just make the case of the reminder, as Casey mentioned, this has had top level governor's office support from the start. And this wasn't a one-off initiative. This is part of a broader series that it is not one-off. We literally come back to it every month in cabinet meetings. We come back to it in every month in our deputies meetings. It is on the agenda, which is how are we doing on the talent management transformation? So it is a recurring theme where the senior leadership has invested significant time. It is not one priority among 57. It is front and center of how we're trying to improve state government.
That's great.
You know, I would just add too, along a parallel track with that, we've also instigated continuous improvement and operational excellence to really teach, and again, it's an investment in professional development, but in improving the processes for delivery of services to our citizens more efficiently. And so hopefully there's savings along those lines, but we also need the investment in our workforce to get there. So it's kind of a dual track.
Yeah, I'm seeing also a lot of trends with the Colorado, that top level support. People are really important, but also something that Cara had mentioned that they're working on that it seems like you guys may be a little bit more advanced and want to tap your ear was these performance evaluations. They had talked about they're just kind of starting to redo those performance evaluations. And something you mentioned we haven't dug into a lot is the upward evaluations, evaluating your managers, evaluating your peers, that 360 evaluation. When we polled states, very few people in the public sector are doing upward or peer level evaluations. How are you guys doing that?
Casey, you want to highlight that?
Sure. So just as Drew describes, you can, all team members, every team member, all 50,000 of them, can provide feedback on their phone to their supervisors. We had a lot of debates about the logistics of that and who would receive it and who would see it. Mm-hmm. And so some of the key decisions that were made is that the information only goes to that supervisor. And that's part of the do, learn, do. We got to crawl before we can walk, before we can run. And so that gave people and supervisors a little bit more confidence that we can do this. It's only going to come to me. I'm going to use this information how I need to use it. We 4 times a year, team members can provide that upward feedback, and it's 5 or 6 basic questions. And then we ask, we have 2 open text boxes that just say one thing that your supervisor could improve upon and one thing that they're doing very well. And so as Drew mentioned, about 50%. We our highest to date one quarter, we had 51%. We around 48%, 49% some quarters, but we're really trying to help encourage that by sharing the success stories from supervisors who have never received feedback like this before, and sharing the story of, I didn't know my team members wanted me to talk to them more. I thought they wanted me to stay out of their way and just let them do what they needed to do. But seeing the data in front of them from all of their team members has, I think, really encouraged that feedback loop between team members and supervisors, and so strengthened the relationship, but also helped those supervisors with their own continuous improvement.
I was just going to add on to Casey's point, just 2 points of elaboration. One is we explicitly frame the upward feedback as developmental, not evaluation. So that is the number 1. So it's like welcome and encouraged. So it is optional, but it is developmental. And as Casey framed it up well, it goes to the supervisor and it is not used in an evaluation or gotcha fashion. So that's number 1. And I think the other interesting point in terms of the design, the very practical design for our colleagues, this really emerged out of the piloting of our approach of Engage 2.0, where senior leaders were skeptical of, will this work? Are we right at this point in time that people will be willing to do upward feedback? Will supervisors really want it? But when we piloted it in 2 departments, this is one of the themes that emerged, was actually supervisors really did want this much more, quite frankly, than we anticipated. And that shaped the design of the program, again, through the kind of do, learn, do piloting it. This was one of the surprises, I would say, in the initial design, how receptive supervisors were, that they were actually looking for this developmental feedback.
I'm going to stay here a little bit because I think this is going to be really interesting to other states, this upward feedback point. So Sarah, I'm going to ask you a question. And Casey, I'm assuming you've got a phone and you're going to give Sarah developmental feedback on how she answers this question, right? Sarah, can we talk about resistance to this? I'm imagining, I think it was Governor Parsons' inauguration just yesterday, right? So you're at the inauguration, you're mixing with state legislature members, and they're saying, really, we're going to give frontline employees the ability to give feedback on a phone to their supervisors. Like, what does this look like? And then resistance from those frontline supervisors. Obviously, it's probably anecdotal rather than data. How are you? Drew touched on how you're selling it, but how are you policing this? And then how are you rolling this out over other agencies? Is this going to the Department of Corrections, to state police? How far can you spread this mantra, so to speak?
Yeah. You give me all the hard questions.
I do. I always give you the hard questions. I'm sorry. I know you'll give great answers.
No, it has, that is part of the implementation. We're still implementing, and we're still talking about the why. Why are we doing this? And it always seems to go back to that, to convince people this is the way we get better. We're helping each other get better. And you know, when you put it in those kind of terms, and you take the being defensive out of it, then most people start to understand it a little better. But we, you know, even now, over and over again, through our town halls, through all our communications, through our engaged training, through a variety of different avenues that we talk to people and communicate with people, we're reinforcing that this is to help us all get better. You know, when you think about it, and this is still mind-boggling to me, some supervisors only talking to those people that they're supervising once a year. I mean, think about that. That doesn't work. You know, it doesn't work when you don't talk to people. And so talking to them once a month, and then hearing from them what that feedback is and how they can do better. Yeah, it's hard for some people, but for some people it's not. And we're just trying to coach people along the way that they have to, it's important to make these changes for all of us to work better together.
Okay. I would add to Sarah's point, just to kind of put a point of emphasis, which is the rollout mattered a lot, as in every single supervisor in state government had to go through the Engage 2.0 training, including all cabinet department leaders themselves. I went through it, you know, like a full day of training. And that's symbolically but substantively important. It's a common approach, it's a common vocabulary, and it's not just one day of training, but it shows like that's a significant investment of time and energy. And then to say for every state employee, there's a base level of training that they need to complete just to know the basics, the vocabulary, the approach. That means a lot. And we're continuing that onwards to refresh the why. But that's, again, symbolically and substantively is important in the change management.
Yeah, it reminds me of like if you're an executive of UPS, you had to have driven a truck for a while.
Yeah, that's exactly.
What does this thing cost? So if I'm sitting in another state right now, I'm saying, okay, this sounds great. What does it cost me? Run us through some of the numbers.
Have we got a deal for you? Just wait, you know, we have steak knives. We have a little bit of everything for you. I'll say a few words on it overall, but and then Casey and Sarah will provide some of the details. But the design principle from the start was, quite frankly, and very explicitly, if we want this to be sustainable, given the fact that people may be skeptical, given the fact that we may need to convince them, it has to be as cost effective as possible. That's number one. Number two, what that meant is explicitly, we need to be as much homegrown and home delivered as possible. That's the second proposition. So when we do go for external help, it has to be with a very, very good business case to get support, which we've been able to do. And Sarah's led the effort on that with the General Assembly, but very targeted. There have been targeted significant investments, but they've been targeted. So overall, much of it is designed and delivered homegrown, so to speak. Much of our training in things like the Missouri Way training, designed and delivered homegrown. Our Leadership Academy, basically designed and delivered homegrown. But the backbone of the Engage 2.0, and Sarah can speak to the legislative support for that, that required investment to make the commitment. And our Mo Learning partnership, you know, those partnerships do require a broader base of stakeholder understanding and support. So
I look at it like this: the General Assembly was our partner in developing what we call reward for performance. So they did provide one-time funding for us to get some outside help to construct what we've done. But as Drew pointed out, we've gone way beyond that initial investment. That was to really put together our Engage and how do we, you know, fairly and accurately measure performance. And that was a significant investment over a period of time from the General Assembly. And then Casey, you may want to speak to some of the other, well, I will say this, the Mo learning cost is very, very cost effective. It is, you know, less than $5 a person. So for what you get for it, it's a good deal.
Casey, before we jump to you, I just want to make sure. So what you're saying, because we have external partners in the private sector that are listening to this call, which is there's very much a place for the private sector, but Absolutely. Define that space, make sure it's value driven. It can be profitable, but it's likely to be tighter scoped in this budget environment. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's in the public domain. It's no secret, and you know, we're proud. We had a performance partnership with Deloitte was our partner for the design of Engage 2.0. It truly is kind of state of the art, and I would say that compared to the private sector as well. I think that we're very comfortable, and the standard was we want to be as good as anyone in how we're designing the training, the rollout, the tools that we're using, the evaluation. And Deloitte was an essential partner in that. And in our Mo learning effort, and Casey can describe that in greater detail, our performance partner on that is LinkedIn and LinkedIn Learning as a very robust partnership across multiple aspects of what we're doing in our talent development.
Casey, dive into that.
Yeah. So this is a great segue because I really wanted to make sure that we got in the piece of the technology, because as Drew said, we wanted to be as good as any private organization. And part of that, it was making our team members feel good about the technology and the capabilities to do what we were asking them to do. It needed to be easy. It needed to be slick. And so we partnered, I don't know if we're allowed to use, so we partnered with Qualtrics, and which is a survey platform. And I had some previous experience with Qualtrics, and so I knew what the capabilities might be, but we have really stretched what the capabilities of Qualtrics to match what we needed it to do. And so just like supervisors and team members fill out their evaluation and their upward feedback, they also get the results on their phones. And so supervisors, when they see their upward feedback, they have a cool little dashboard. It's color coded. You can have cool little word clouds in it. And then all the evaluations are also on a dashboard and have different ways that you can slice and dice the data. And in addition to that, we are leveraging that Qualtrics platform for dozens of other data collection purposes around the state. Colorado mentioned that you all survey your team members on a regular basis. We do what's called a quarterly pulse survey. And so we survey all 50,000 team members every single quarter, and we're leveraging Qualtrics to do that. We're also leveraging Qualtrics to do onboarding surveys, exit surveys. We are trying to do as much data collection as we can now that we have this platform. And so in terms of cost effectiveness, we have tried to stretch it for everything that we've got. I will say that my division of personnel has really brought in, we've been able to attract and recruit some really top-notch professionals on all pieces of the talent management transformation because of the excitement that we have with all of these and all of these projects. And so as Drew mentioned, a lot of it is homegrown. The ideas and the elbow grease is homegrown. Qualtrics didn't come out of the box being able to do what we needed it to do, but it was my fantastic team members who were able to make it happen.
This is terrifying to me, the idea that we're being assessed on a cell phone. How do you replicate that look of judgment that Jamie gives me over the camera that I messed something up? How are you replicating that? Jamie, I think we've got a question from the audience.
Yeah, specifically, it looks like several questions on supervisors, but once you get this data, and you kind of talked about this, it wasn't an evaluation, but how do you then use that to help improve supervisors' performance?
Could I take it?
Yeah, Casey.
So as was previously mentioned, we wanted it to be constructive development to begin with, because people were wary, people were scared. This was the first time we were doing it. And so the way that we have done it is telling the supervisors to take this data to their engaged conversations with their supervisors. And so when Sarah and I have engaged conversations every month, it's an expectation that I'm going to bring my engaged upward feedback to my conversation with Sarah so that I can say, this is what I'm hearing. Have you seen this? What ideas do you have for my improvement in this area? And even more than that is that we encourage this, and I know that our division does it, our department does it. I take the upward feedback, and as soon as I get it, I put it in front of my entire leadership team, and I say, thank you for this feedback. Here's what you told me I need to work on, and here are the 1 or 2 things that I am focused on working on for the next quarter, and I hope that when you give me feedback next quarter, you will be able to say that I have moved the needle in this area or not. And so I think that it's, as silly as it sounds, I think it's a little bit more of the personal responsibility in terms of taking it to the engaged conversations, either with my supervisor or with the team members who provided me upward feedback.
I think Casey just provided a great example that, and I'm sure that everyone online appreciates, but this is really about trying to change, and we're using different tools, but it's fundamentally about changing mindsets and behaviors where people get more comfortable providing each other feedback, and also sharing their own developmental goals, right? If I go into a room, for example, it's quite common where I say, like, how many of you have shared with your teams what developmental goals do you have? And like only 10% of the people raise their hand. It needs to be 100%, right? If we're going to be successful, we need to be in an environment where people are professionally and constructively sharing, this is what I'm working on to get better. And they should be welcoming that and inviting that, and vice versa. And that's what we're trying to get to. Look, no one's naive. This is a multi-year journey. But the fact that we started a journey where there's skepticism of upward feedback optional, as an example, and you now have 50% of the people doing it in a year, that's an example of behavioral change. It didn't exist before. Now we've got about 50% of the people doing it voluntarily. Okay, we're making progress. Are we where we want to be? No. Will we be there in 5 years? Probably not. We're going to have to continue on the journey beyond that. But this is what we're trying to do, is shape more fundamental behaviors and mindsets so that we get to a place where people are more comfortable with providing feedback and continuous improvement.
Now, Scott, what I love about NASCA events is something gets mentioned 1 year, employer choice, and then the next year we have 10 states that came and say, look, I implemented it. I think in a year from now, we're going to hear about upward performance evaluations just based on the comments and people being so interested in what Missouri's doing. So we'll have to check back with everyone in a year now that you've inspired them.
Yeah, I agree. And I love that Colorado was, I think the theme was accessibility of talent. And you're all saying, if you work for the state of Missouri, we're all accountable here at every level, all the way to the chief executive. And this is how we operate. I love that. Casey, Drew, Sarah, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I know you've got a lot on your plate. And I just want to say thanks. And we hand over to Pam. And I believe we're moving to the Commonwealth of Virginia.